Greetings, Michael Didier here. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so glad you're here. We are going back to Joseph today. We go kind of back and forth. Last week, 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, we talked about all the wives that Jacob's son's seed took to themselves. I think many of them were even before Joseph went down to Egypt. Well, that blows a few minds. Then we went and we talked about the two servants of Pharaoh. I called him the winemaker, the chief winemaker. I think we called, let's see what we have here. They called him the butler. I call him, it's the cupbearer's chief. Cupbearer's chief. He's the cupbearer's chief. That's what it says in Torah. It's more than one cupbearers. Maybe they've got, shifts. So they need more than one cupbearer. But he's the chief cupbearer. And I got a hunch that this man was responsible for brewing the wine also. And that may be why he got in trouble, because he had flies in his wine. Well, last week we talked about the dreams that the baker and the cupbearer had when they were in jail. And, enough of that. Thank you. I'm babysitting the dog today. Enough. No. You be quiet. Shh. Sorry, guys. They had dreams. Joseph interpreted their dreams, and he did it accurately. One was going to live and be out in 3 days. One was going to die in 3 days. And right after we talked about this, let me go back just a little bit, because we got to think about this. Here we are in chapter 39. 39. And this is Joseph going down to Egypt. Remember, Potiphar's woman gave Joseph such a hard time, ended up getting him thrown in jail. She even tried to get him in jail, entice him. Come to me and I'll get you out. Joseph didn't want any part of it. But how old was Joseph when he went to jail? I have a calendar of events, a sequence of events in the life of Joseph. And we can see that he went into Potiphar's house when he was 17, same year that he was sold into slavery. At 18, he went into prison. And it was 10 years before he interpreted the dreams of these two men in chapter 40. 10 years. We don't have any clue how much time goes by in Torah. Well, actually, there is one clue. Maybe it's in the next chapter, 41, that we're going to talk about today. But because we have Yasher, because we are able to put together a timeline, we see that he interpreted their dreams when he was 28 years old. Well, we went through that same chapter in Yasher last week, talking about that and all the things that went on during that time. It's a rather short chapter. The longer chapter that we went to last week was what happened when Joseph was 29 years old, and that was when Isaac died. There was quite a lot of information in Yasher about that event. But look at this. The only thing they tell us, this is in 35 of Genesis. It says, now the days of Isaac were 180 years old. Where does this even come from? Then it says, Isaac breathed his last and was gathered to his people, being old and full of days. And his son Esau and Jacob buried him. That's it. We know nothing else about the death of Isaac. Yet we had an entire chapter, almost 50 verses, last week where we talked about the death of Isaac, the things that he told his sons when he was passing, kind of sending them on their way. Very enlightening. Do you remember Joseph had the birthright? Remember, Esau sold it for a bowl of porridge. Yet when it came time to divide the stuff, it was Esau who said, you divide it in half, Jacob, and I'll take the half I want. Well, how much was Jacob supposed to get? Jacob was supposed to get 2/3, not 1/2. He was supposed to get twice what Esau got. But Jacob was willing to go even beyond that. He said, I'll take the land and you can have all the stuff. He said, the souls of men. I think they just said souls. But they're talking about servants, men servants, female servants, the flocks, the cattle, the stuff, gold, silver, bdellium, all the stuff, everything that they had, they were putting it into 2 pots, the land and everything else. And remember, it was Esau who talked to Nabayot, the son of Ishmael, who said, take the stuff, Esau. And that's exactly what happened. He says, the Canaanites are fully settled in this land. What good is the land to us? But Jacob knew the promise of Yehovah. He wanted the land. Remember, it's all about the land and the seed. The land and the seed. We're doing it for the land and the seed. He wants to raise up a kingdom. And he's marching, like Joseph, he's marching to a different drummer than Esau, the man of the flesh, is marching. Well, let's go back to, I think we'll start at 41. Let me get there. This will be faster. There we go. It says, it came to pass at the end of 2 full years. 2 full years. You know, we don't see how time goes by in Torah. We're blind to it. I think it was down here around 46. Yeah, here. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. 46. That's about the only date that we actually get. Here it says, after 2 full years. Well, they just talked in the last chapter, 41, about the butcher and the baker I keep calling the butcher and the baker, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker going to prison. But we don't know how long Joseph was in prison before they even showed up. Well, they showed up after Joseph was 9 years in prison. And in his 10th year in prison, he interpreted the dreams. Remember, he told him, I'm in here, I'm innocent. Please tell the Pharaoh to get me out. And because he made that plea, trying to get out on his own recognizance, I guess you could say, it said Yehovah kept him in an extra couple of years. And it wasn't until 30 that he's now going to come before Pharaoh. So here we are, starting in 41. It says, then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years. This is after he had interpreted correctly the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker, that the Pharaoh had a dream. And behold, he stood by a river. You know, this is going to get a little bit redundant, and I apologize ahead of time. I'm simply going through what it says, but it does seem rather redundant at times, especially when we start talking about the interpretations, not only here, but in Yasher. Bear with me. Suddenly there came out of the river 7 cows, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine-looking and fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke, and he slept and dreamed a second time. And suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Then, behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. But Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. You know, we almost always see that if the Pharaoh's going to have the dream, or Avimelech is going to have a dream, or any Gentile person, I hate to even use the word Gentile, any person who's not Yehovah's man, who is in covenant with him, let's put it that way. They have dreams. They don't have visions. They have dreams. Now it came to pass in the morning, on verse 8, that his spirit was troubled. And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. Notice this, his spirit. We have spirits. Men have spirits. Do ladies have spirit? I don't know. Men have spirit. Not Yehovah's spirit. Remember, it's spirit Yehovah. We're going to talk about that today. But he has a spirit. He says he takes away their spirit, they die. Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my faults this day. Boy, we sure got here fast. It's going to take much longer in Yasher. What's his fault? When Pharaoh was angry at his servant and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. I wonder if that was Potiphar. Potiphar was the captain of the guards. Both me and the chief baker. We each had a dream one night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now, there was a young Hebrew man with us there, a servant of the captain of the guard. Here, this is it. This is Pharaoh, look. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. Then in 40, we saw this. So he put him in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison, the place where Joseph was confined. Interesting, to me anyway. Could this be Potiphar? Would he put him in a position of authority just simply based on the wonderful things that he did for him in his house? Remember, Potiphar put him in jail, knowing after he went to the judges that it was his wife's fault. She was the one that was doing it to Joseph. It all came out. We saw that in Yasher. So to me, it kind of makes sense that Pharaoh would put him in charge here if he's the captain of the guard. Now, maybe there's other guard that we're talking about, but I think it's a possibility. Let me continue. It says, and we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man, he interpreted according to his own dream. It came to pass, just as he had interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged him. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph. Look at how fast this is going. You're going to be very surprised when you see how much more information is covered in Yasher about this story. And they brought him quickly out of the dungeon, and he shaved and changed his clothes and came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there's no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it's said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not me. Elohim will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, Behold, in my dream I stood on the banks of the river. Suddenly 7 cows came out of the river, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt. Such ugliness I have never seen in the land of Egypt. And the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7, the fat cows. When they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as in the beginning. So I woke. Also, I saw in my dream, and suddenly 7 heads came up on one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 heads withered and thin, blinded by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, and there was no one who could explain it to me. Yes, this is the condensed version, the Reader's Digest of this story. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. See where it says God? It doesn't say God. It says the Elohim. You know, up here he said God. He used the word God. I don't know where it was. There it is right there. God will give Pharaoh the interpretation. But here, Joseph is being more specific. The Elohim has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Oh, that puts chills down my body. Yehovah is using Pharaoh. Yehovah is using Joseph. After 13 years in captivity, now to become one of the great ones in Egypt. I'm going to call this series today and next week the exaltation of Joseph, or Joseph is exalted. The Elohim has shown Pharaoh that what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are 1. And the 7 thin and ugly cows, which came up after the 7 years, and the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind, are 7 years of the famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. The Elohim, here it is. I always mark these down. Every place in Torah where it has the Elohim instead of just Elohim. That's important. The definite article. How can you leave out a definite article like this? You know what? Almost every version does. That says something about the publishers. Maybe it says more about the owners of the publishers. Do you think? We hear a lot more about Esau sometimes than we do Jacob. Here is Yehovah doing a wonderment in the life of Joseph and in the people of Egypt for the whole world at that time is going to be preserved because of what Joseph has been through and has been raised to do, and interpreting this dream and then following through on what's going to happen. The Elohim has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Gosh, wouldn't that, as Pharaoh, the Elohim, there was a lot of gods in Egypt, but the Elohim is showing Pharaoh what he's about to do. Did any of the other Elohim in Egypt tell Pharaoh what he's going to do? No. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout the land of Egypt. But after them, 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will deplete the land. So the plenty will not be known in the land because the famine following, for it will be very severe. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice because the thing is established by the Elohim. And the Elohim will shortly bring it to pass. The 7 years of plenty are starting now. This moment that Pharaoh is starting to hear it. He's got to act quickly. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint an officer over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. I've never totally understood why 1/5 would be enough. 1/5 is 20% of the 7 fat years, if you will. It's not going to multiply itself in storage. How do they use that to get through the 7 bad years? I always ask myself. Perhaps they can still eat some of the grains that have been eaten and thinned by the east wind. And this is what's just going to be enough to take them through the end, take them through the full 7 years. Well, let me pick up on 35. And let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh. And let them keep food in the cities. I have a picture of some of the storage things I would take too much time, I think, to find it. Maybe I'll try and pull it out for next week. Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which will be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine, that the land may not perish during the famine. Interesting, they say land. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a man as this? Here's what it actually says. So Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man who has spirit Elohim in him? We talk about the Spirit of God. God is spirit. We go through all our Trinity BS. But in Genesis 1, it says, Spirit Elohim was over the earth. Spirit Elohim. Elohim is spirit. Can we find a man who has spirit Elohim in him? This is what a spiritually born man has in him. Spirit Elohim. Remember, he's created in his likeness and his image. All the other men in the world are created in Adam's likeness and in Adam's image. There's a difference. The spiritually born Ezra men, the men who left the kingdom of their birth and came in covenant with Yehovah, have spirit Elohim in them. This really challenges me to want to give my all to Yehovah. Can he use me like he used Joseph? Oh, look what this is interesting. From the very beginning, Joseph's physical descent into Egypt, slavery, prison, the presence of the sovereign one has been recognized by all who encounter Joseph. Do you remember the Ishmaelites? They knew Joseph was different. When they struck him, something happened to them, and they learned to respect Joseph. They even sold him when they got to Egypt to the Midianites for the same price they bought him. Potiphar, he recognized Yehovah in Joseph right away. Put him in charge of everything. Same with the guard in the prison. Might have been Potiphar himself also. And now, here's Pharaoh. Can we find any man who has spirit Elohim in him? He's supposed to find a wise man and put him in charge. Well, this story is much, much deeper in Yasher than we're going to find here. But let's finish this chapter. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as Elohim, he didn't say the Elohim, inasmuch as Elohim has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set thee over the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he said to him, ride in the second chariot which he had. And he cried out before him, bow the knee. So he set him over the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no man may lift his hand or foot in the land of Egypt. what authority Joseph has been given. He was a slave. He was in prison for 13 years. No, 12 years. And now he's going to be over the entire land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphanat. Here, I've got it here. I'm going to forget. Zaphanat Paneka. And he gave him his wife, Asnat, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. So Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. 13 years after he got sold into slavery. Now he's the king of the world. I'm the king of the world. So Pharaoh and Joseph went from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. Now, in the 7 plentiful years, the ground brought forth abundantly. He gathered up the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt and laid up food in the cities. He laid up in every city the food of the field which surrounded them. Joseph gathered very much grain, as the sands of the sea, until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. That's a lot of grain. And to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of the famine came. Here we are. He's 34. Joseph's twin sons are born. Twin sons. Do we think of them as being twin sons? I don't think we do. Twin sons are born. We're going to see it in Yasher. That's 34. So 4 years into the good years. 37 is when the bad years are going to begin. Joseph called the name of his firstborn Manasseh, for Elohim had made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, for Elohim has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Then the 7 years of plenty which were in the land of Egypt ended, and the 7 years of famine began to come as Joseph had said. Let's see what the note says here. And the famine prevailed throughout the land, and the famine was in all the countries, but the land of Egypt there was produce for sale. The famine was in all the lands, but in the land of Egypt there was bread. All right. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Then Pharaoh said to Egypt, "Go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, do." The famine was over all the face of the earth. You know, it doesn't say the face of the world. It says the face of the earth. There's something for us to see there too. And Joseph opened up all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. And the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. So all the countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe in all lands. All the Arets, probably. Haaretz, yes, that's what it says. All the lands, not lands, all the lands. I hate it when they leave out that definite article. From here, next week, we're going to go to, this is Jacob sending the sons. No, we're probably not even going to get to this next week. We're probably going to have another chapter in between, but this is coming soon. So let's go to Yasher, and we're going to start in chapter 48. We just did 41, and here we are. It says after the death of Isaac here. I wonder if we can find the blessing. Here. As Isaac was dying, he spoke to Esau and gave him kind of a prophecy. Maybe it's not a prophecy. It's, well, you call it what you like. He says, Isaac also blessed his son Esau, saying, may Elohim cause you to be a dread and a terror to all who will behold you and to all your enemies. That doesn't sound very positive, does it? You're going to be a terror to all who behold you. This is Esau. This is what Esau's like. He lives by fear and intimidation, kind of like the deep state. The they that we always talk about. But look what he says about Isaac. And Isaac called Jacob and his sons. And they all came and sat before Isaac. And Isaac said to Jacob, Yehovah, Elohim of the whole earth, said unto me, unto thy seed I will give this land for an inheritance, if thy seed keep my statutes and my ways. I will perform unto them the oath which I swore unto thy father Abraham. See, it's about the land and the sea. When they go to divide up the stuff, Jacob remembers the promise. The word that his father gave him, the last thing he told him. Unto thy seed I will give the land. Oh my goodness. Well, so in those days after the death of Isaac, Yehovah commanded and caused the famine upon the whole earth. Remember, he interpreted the dreams of the cupbearer, chief cupbearer, and the chief baker when he was 28. When he was 29, Isaac died. And that whole chapter, 47, was all about that. Now, it says, in those days, after the death of Isaac, Yehovah commanded and caused a famine upon the whole earth. When is this happening? This is happening when Pharaoh dreams his dreams. Like I said, when he dreams it, it's starting right there. Act quickly, Pharaoh. At that time, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, was sitting upon the throne in the land of Egypt and lay in his bed and dreamed dreams. And Pharaoh saw in his dream that he was standing by the side of the river of Egypt. And whilst he was standing, he saw, and behold, 7 fat-fleshed and well-favored kine came up out of the river, and 7 other kine, lean-fleshed and ill-favored, lean-fleshed and ill-favored, came up after them. And the 7 ill-favored swallowed up the well-favored ones, and still their appearance was ill as at first. And he awoke, and he slept again, and dreamed a second dream. And he saw, and behold, 7 ears of corn. Oh, look, it's corn here instead of wheat. Came up on one stalk. That makes more sense. Came up on one stalk, rank and good. And the 7 thin ears, blasted with the east wind, sprang up after them. And the thin ears swallowed up the full ears. And Pharaoh awoke out of his dream. And in the morning, the king remembered his dreams, and his spirit, his ruach, was sadly troubled on account of his dreams. And the king hastened and sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and the wise men And they came and stood before Pharaoh. And the king said to them, I have dreamed dreams, and there is none to interpret them. And they said to the king, relate thy dreams to thy servants, and let us hear them. And the king related his dreams to them. And they all answered and said with one voice to the king, may the king live forever. May the king live forever. And this is the interpretation of thy dreams. The 7 good kind which thou didst denote denote 7 daughters that will be born unto thee in the latter days. And the 7 kind which thou sawest came up after them and swallowed them up are for a sign that the daughters will be born unto thee will all die in the lifetime of the king. And that which thou didst see of the second dream, the 7 full good ears of corn coming up on one stalk, this is their interpretation, that thou wilt build unto thyself in the latter days 7 cities throughout the land of Egypt. And that which thou sawest of the 7 blasted ears of corn springing up after them and swallowing them up, whilst thou didst behold them with thy eyes, is the sign that the cities which thou wilt build will be destroyed in the latter days in the lifetime of the king. And when they spoke these words, the king did not incline his ears to their words, neither did he fix his heart upon them, for the king knew in his wisdom that they did not give a proper interpretation of the dreams. And when they had finished speaking before the king answered them, saying, what is this thing that you have spoken unto me? Surely you have uttered falsehood and spoken lies, falsehoods and spoken lies. Therefore now give the proper interpretation of my dreams, that you may not die. He's getting ready to kill all the magicians and the wise men. And the king commanded after this. And he sent and called again for other wise men. And they came and stood before the king, and the king related his dream to them. And they answered him according to the first interpretation. And the king's anger was kindled, and he was wroth. And the king said to them, surely you speak lies and utter falsehoods in what you have said. And the king commanded that the proclamation should be issued throughout the land of Egypt, saying, it is resolved by the king and his great men that any wise man who knows and understands the interpretation of dreams and will not come this day before the king, he shall die. The king knows that this is something important. He doesn't know what it is, but he knows it's important. Important enough that he's willing to kill these guys who are giving poor interpretations. And the man that will declare unto the king the proper interpretation of his dream, there shall be given unto him all that he will require from the king. And all the wise men of the land of Egypt came before the king together with all the magicians and sorcerers. Now we got sorcerers involved that were in Egypt and in Goshen and Ramses and Tahpanhes and Zor and all the places in the borders of Egypt. And they all stood before the king. And all the nobles and the princes and the attendants belonging to the king came together from all the cities of Egypt. And they all sat before the king, and the king related his dreams before the wise men and the princes. And all that sat before the king were astonished at the vision. And all the wise men who were before the king were greatly divided in their interpretation of the dreams. Some of them interpreted them to the king, saying, the 7 good kind are 7 kings who from the king's issue will be raised over Egypt. 7 kings, his sons from him. And the 7 bad kind are 7 princes who will stand up against them in the latter days and destroy them. And the 7 ears of corn are the 7 great princes belonging to Egypt, who will fall in the hands of the 7 less powerful princes of their enemies in wars of our land, the king, in the wars of our land, of our Lord the king. And some of them interpreted to the king in this manner, saying, the 7 good kind, are strong cities of Egypt, and the 7 bad kind are 7 nations in the land of Canaan, who will come against the 7 cities in Egypt in the latter days and destroy them. And that which thou sawest in the second dream of the 7 good and bad ears of corn is a sign that the government of Egypt will again return to thy seed at first. And in his reign, the people of the cities of Egypt will turn against the 7 cities of Canaan, who are stronger than they are, and will destroy them, and the governments of Egypt will return to thy seed. Trying to give him good things. This is actually good news. You're not going to buy it. And some of them said unto the king, this is the interpretation of thy dreams. The 7 good kind are 7 queens, whom thou wilt take for wise women in their latter days. And the 7 bad kind denote those women will all die in the lifetime of the king. And the 7 good and bad ears of the corn, which thou didst see in the second dream, are 14 children. And it will be in the latter days that they will stand up and fight against themselves, and 7 of them will smite the 7 that are. The 7 of them will smite the 7 that are more powerful. And some of them said these words to the king, saying, the 7 good kind denote 7 children, sons, who will be born to thee, and they will slay 7 of thy sons' sons in the latter days. And the 7 good ears of corn, which thou didst see in the second dream, are the princes, among whom 7 other less powerful princes will fight and destroy them in the latter days, and avenge thy seeds, thy sons' cause, probably, and the government will again return to thy seed. Yeah, they always want to have it return to thy seed. This is actually going to turn out, it's going to be okay. These are good things. This is a good interpretation. Look, it ends happily. It says, the king heard all the words of the wise men of Egypt and their interpretation of his dreams, and none of them pleased the king. And the king knew in his wisdom that they did not altogether speak correctly in all these words, for this was from Yehovah, to frustrate the words of the wise men of Egypt. You know, this is again, we're seeing Yehovah's hand in the life of Joseph. For this was from Yehovah to frustrate the words of the wise men of Egypt, in order that Joseph might go forth from the house of confinement, and in order that he should become great in Egypt. Oh, glory to Yehovah. And the king saw that none amongst all the wise men and the magicians of Egypt spoke correctly to him. And the king's wrath was kindled, and his anger burned within him. And the king commanded that all the wise men and the magicians should go out from before him. And they all went out before the king with shame and disgrace. Listen to this. And the king commanded that the proclamation should be set throughout the land of Egypt to slay the magicians that were in Egypt. And not one of them should be suffered to live. Oh my goodness. And the captain of the captains of the guards. Well, here, there's multiple captains of the guard. So maybe it's not Potiphar that was over the prison, because there's captains of the guards. Belong to the king rose up, and each man drew his sword, and they began to smite the magicians of Egypt and the wise men. They're going to do it right there. After this, Marod, chief butler, look at, he's got a king, he's got a name now. He's called Marod, the chief butler, the chief cupbearer. I think he's the vintner of the king. Came and bowed down before the king and sat before him. And the butler said unto the king, may the king live forever. And the government, and his government be exalted in the land. Thou wast angry with thy servant in those days. Now 2 years passed, and didst place me in a ward, and it's actually 3 years. Remember, they were there for a year before Joseph even began to talk to them and gave them. Then it was 2 years, but get the idea. Now 2 years passed, and did place me over the ward. Place me in the ward, and I was for some time in the ward, I and the chief baker. And there was a Hebrew servant belonging to the captain of the guard. His name was Joseph, for his master had been angry with him and placed him in the house of confinement. See that? His master had been angry with him and placed him in the house of confinement. And he attended us there. Was he in charge? Was his master who was, I wonder if it's the same guy. And in some time after, when we were in the ward, we dreamed dreams in one night, I and the chief baker. We dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And we came in the morning and told them to that servant. And he interpreted to us our dreams. To each man according to his dream did he incorrectly interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so was the event. There fell not to the ground any of his words. Everything he said was meaningful. And now, therefore, my Lord, Adonai, King, do not slay the people of Egypt for naught. Behold, that slave is still confined in the house of the captain of the guard, his master, in the house of confinement. And if it pleases the king, let him send for him, that he may come before thee, and he will make known to thee the correct interpretation of the dream which thou did dream. Wow, that is quite a statement. Talk about putting your life on the line. He's that convinced that Joseph can interpret the dream. It's pretty powerful words. And the king heard the words of the chief butler, the vintner, and the king ordered that the wise men of Egypt should not be slain. Look at that. He saved the life of so many men. And the king ordered his servants to bring Joseph before him. And the king said unto them, Go to him, and do not terrify him, lest he be confused and will not know to speak properly. The king recognizes that this man who's been in prison can probably be terrified pretty easily. And he wants to have clarity of mind in Joseph's head, so that he can interpret his dream correctly. And the servant of the king went to Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. And the king's servants shaved him and changed his prison garments, and he came before the king. And the king was sitting upon his royal throne in a priestly dress girt around him with golden ephod. And fine gold which was upon it sparkled, and the carbuncle, and the ruby, and the emerald, together with all the precious stones that were upon the king's head, dazzled the eye. And Joseph wondered greatly at the king. And the throne upon which the king sat was covered with gold and silver, and with onyx stones. And it had 70 steps. He is way in the air, 70 steps up. And it was their custom throughout the land of Egypt that every man who came to speak to the king, if he was a prince or one that was inestimable, that which is worthy of regard, estimable, in the sight of the king, he ascended to the king's throne as far as the 31st step, not even halfway. Remember, there are 70 steps. And the king would descend to the 36th step and speak with him. If he was one of the common people, he ascended to the 3rd step, and the king would descend to the 4th step and speak with him. And their custom was, moreover, that any man who understood to speak all the 70 languages, he ascended to the 70th step and went up and spoke till he reached the king. If you know all 70 languages of the nations, you get to go up and sit with the king. And any man who could not complete the 70, he ascended to as many steps as the languages which he knew to speak. If he knew 69 languages, he went to the 69th step. It was customary in those days in Egypt that no one should reign over them, but who understands to speak the 70 languages. You see, there's so much more that we need to understand in Yasher than we get to see in Torah, in Genesis. Such a shame. And when Joseph came before the king, he bowed down to the ground before the king and ascended to the 3rd step. He's one of the common guys. He's probably worse than one of the common guys. He's a prisoner. And the king sat upon the 4th step and spoke to Joseph. And the king said to Joseph, I dreamed a dream, and there was no interpreter to interpret it properly. And I commanded this day that all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men thereof should come before me. And I related my dream to them, and no one has properly interpreted them to me. And after this, I this day heard concerning thee that thou art a wise man, and canst correctly interpret every dream which thou hearest. No pressure, Joseph. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, Let Pharaoh relate his dreams, let Pharaoh relate his dreams which he dreamed. Surely the interpretation belongs to thee, Elohim. Yeah, this is basically saying the same thing. Let me read my note here. Remember that the word Elohim is a somewhat generic term meaning strong authority, mighty ones, judges, and lawmakers. When Joseph speaks to Pharaoh, however, he always uses the definite article the before the word Elohim, indicating a definite or specific strong authority, mighty one, or lawmaker and judge. Yeah, he's talking about the Elohim. I love this. And Pharaoh related his dream to Joseph, the dream of the kine and the dream of the ears of corn, and the king left off speaking. And Joseph was then clothed with spirit Elohim before the king. And he knew all the things that would befall the king from that day forward. And he knew the proper interpretation of the king's dream, and he spoke before the king. And Joseph found favor in the sight of the king, and the king inclined his ears and his heart and heard the words of Joseph. And Joseph said to the king, Do not imagine that they are two dreams, for it is only one dream. For that which the Elohim has chosen to do throughout the land, he has shown to the king in his dream. Oh my goodness. What a great honor for the king to hear from the Elohim of all creation. And this is the proper interpretation of the dream. The 7 good kine and the 7 ears are 7 years. And the 7 bad kine and the 7 ears of corn are 7 years. It is one dream. Behold, the 7 years are coming. There will be a great plenty throughout the land. And after that, 7 years of famine will follow them, a very grievous famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten from the land. And the famine will consume the inhabitants of the land. And the king dreamed one dream, and the dream was therefore repeated unto Pharaoh, because of the thing is established by the Elohim, and the Elohim will bring it to pass. But remember also, Joseph dreamed 2 dreams about the sheaves and the 11 stars and the sun and the moon bowing down to him. Oh yes, there are still dreams to be fulfilled. Now therefore, I will give thee counsel. Look at this. This is Joseph giving the Pharaoh counsel. Talk about bold. This is Spirit Elohim speaking through Joseph. He says, and therefore I will give thee counsel and deliver thy soul and the souls of the inhabitants of the land from the evil of the famine, that thou seek throughout thy kingdom a man very discreet and wise, who knows all the affairs of government, and appoint him to superintend all the land of Egypt. And let the man whom thou placed over Egypt appoint officers under him, that they may gather in all the food of the good years that are coming, and let them lay up corn and deposit it in thy appointed stores, and let them keep the food for the 7 years of famine, that it may be found for thee and thy people and the whole land, and that thou and thy land be not cut off by the famine. Let all the inhabitants of the land be also ordered that they gather in every man the produce of his field, for all sorts of food during the 7 good years, and that they place it in their stores, that it says their stores, and that it may be found for them in the days of the famine, and that they may live upon it. Did every man have his own store? I wonder. Nancy, did you want to say something?
No, I just lost you.
Okay, yeah, turn off your mic then. That it may be found.
I gotta get back.
You're back, Nancy. But you got to turn off your mic.
You're on my computer.
Okay. Well, maybe mute your mic, please. That it may be found for them in the days of the famine, and that they may live upon it. They may live upon it. Did people who store up grain and save some, did they get rich too? Or was it all just Pharaoh that got rich? I wonder. This is the proper interpretation of thy dream. And this is the counsel given to the... Here. This is the counsel given to save thy soul and the souls of thy subject. This is Joseph giving Pharaoh counsel on how to handle this situation that's coming upon the earth, specifically Egypt. And the king answered and said to Joseph, who saith and who knows that thy words are correct? And he said unto the king, this shall about be a sign. Look at this. He's given this interpretation, but yet the king is now asking him, prove that you're right. Oh, he's going to regret that. And he said to the king, this shall be a sign for thee respecting all my words, that they are true, and that my advice is good for thee. Behold, thy woman sitteth this day upon the stool of delivery, and she will bear thee a son, and thou shalt rejoice with him. When thy child shall have gone forth from his mother's womb, thy firstborn son that has been born to thee these 2 years back shall die, and thou shalt be comforted in the child that will be born unto thee this day. Wow, I put such a bold statement. Remember, when the Pharaoh was going to bring the butcher and the cupbearer back out of prison, it was for this party, for the birth of his son, 2 years past. The son is 2 years old. And Joseph is telling Pharaoh that his son, his firstborn, is going to die. And Joseph finished speaking these words to the king, and he bowed down to the king, and he went out. And when Joseph had gone from the king's presence, those signs which Joseph had spoken unto the king came to pass on that day. The queen bore a son on that day, and the king heard the glad tidings about his son, and he rejoiced. When the reporter had gone forth from the king's presence, the king's servants found the firstborn son of the king fallen dead upon the ground. And there was great lamentation, and the voice and the noise in the king's house. And the king heard it. And he said, what is the noise and lamentation that I have heard in the house? And they told the king that his firstborn son had died. Then the king knew that all Joseph's words that he had spoken were correct. And the king was consoled for his son by the child that was born to him on that day, as Joseph had spoken. Wow. Talk about boldness. Joseph, he's one of my favorite Bible characters. Of course, I say that every time we talk about Abraham. He's one of my favorite Bible characters. Talk about, I never said that about Isaac. I do say it about Jacob, and I definitely say it about Joseph. Well, next week, we're going to continue. This was 48 that we went through today. Chapter 49, we're going to talk about Joseph being exalted to be in charge in Egypt. It's a great story. Might be a little bit shorter class next week, but coming back again. Join me, please. Always glad to have you here. Thanks. I guess we'll talk to you next time. You guys have a wonderful day.